This is the chilling story of Fred and Rosemary West, a couple who turned an ordinary-looking home at 25 Cromwell Street into a graveyard. The air in Gloucester was damp and gray on the morning of February 24th, 1994. Dozens of police officers and forensic teams stood outside a nondescript, slightly run-down, semi-detached house. Neighbors watched from behind their curtains, thinking it was just a drug raid or a search for a missing girl. They had no idea that they were standing in front of a literal slaughterhouse. Inside, police didn't find bags of white powder or stolen goods. They found a shovel. They began digging in the small, cramped garden and under the concrete floor of the cellar. Within hours, the lead investigator felt his stomach drop. They had found a human bone, then another, then a skull. As the news broke, the man of the house, Fred West, sat in a cold interview room. He looked like an average construction worker, messy hair, thick sideburns, and a thick accent. He smiled at the detectives, almost like he was proud. "There's more," he whispered, "a lot more. But before we get to the bodies under the floorboards, we have to go back to the beginning. Because to understand how 25 Cromwell Street became the House of Horrors, you have to understand the two monsters who lived there. In 1969, Fred West was a 27-year-old van driver with a dark past and a broken marriage. He met 15-year-old Rosemary "Rose" Letts at a bus stop in Cheltenham. To anyone else, Rose was a troubled teenager. To Fred, she was the perfect partner in crime. Fred was already a killer. He had likely murdered his first wife, Catherine Rena Costello, and their young daughter, Charmaine. But instead of Rose being horrified by Fred's violent tendencies, she was fascinated by them. They moved into 25 Cromwell Street in 1972. From the outside, they looked like a chaotic, busy family. They had children of their own, and Fred was always doing DIY work, mixing concrete, bricking up walls, and extending the cellar. People thought he was just a hardworking handyman. In reality, he was building tombs. The Wests didn't just kill, they hunted. They would drive their car around bus stops and cafes, looking for young women who looked lost or lonely. They would offer them a lift or a place to stay. Once the door at Cromwell Street clicked shut, the nightmare began. Their victims weren't just strangers, they targeted their own blood. Their daughter, Heather West, was a bright girl who started questioning what was happening in the house. One day in 1987, Heather disappeared. Fred and Rose told the other children she had simply run away to find work in another city. For 7 years, the Wests lived in that house, eating dinner and watching TV, while Heather's body lay just a few feet below the kitchen floor. Life at 25 Cromwell Street wasn't just weird, it was dangerous. Fred and Rose had developed a terrifying system for picking up victims. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like a bored married couple out for a Sunday drive. They would cruise around the streets of Gloucester and Bristol in their car, specifically targeting young women at bus stops or girls who looked like they were hitchhiking. Fred would lean out the window with a friendly smile, offering a warm car and a lift. If the girl hesitated, Rose, a mother of several children, would chime in to make it feel safe. After all, who would be afraid of a couple? Once a girl stepped into that car, she was already dead. She just didn't know it yet. The guest room. The victims were taken back to the house under the guise of a cup of tea or a place to sleep for the night. But the Wests had modified the house specifically for torture. Fred, being a handyman, had soundproofed certain areas and installed bolts on the outside of bedroom doors. One of their most frequent targets were students and young workers. In 1973, Linda Guff, a 19-year-old who worked at a local shop, moved into a room at Cromwell Street. She thought she'd found a cheap place to live. Instead, she became one of their first victims inside the house. When her parents came looking for her, Rose calmly lied to their faces, saying Linda had just moved out in the middle of the night and left no forwarding address. The family secret. What makes this story even darker is that the West children were living in the house while this was happening. Fred and Rose weren't just serial killers, they were child abusers. The children grew up in an atmosphere of extreme violence and rules that made no sense. The kids knew something was wrong with the DIY projects. Fred was constantly pouring concrete in the cellar or the garden at odd hours of the night. Whenever a lodger disappeared, Fred would suddenly decide the patio needed a new layer of cement. The missing daughter. The biggest red flag, the one that eventually brought the whole house down, was their own daughter, Heather West. In 1987, 16-year-old Heather told her friends she was sick of her parents and wanted to leave. Then, she vanished. When people asked where she was, Fred and Rose had a scripted answer. She's working at a holiday camp in Wales. Or, she ran off with a boyfriend. They even used to joke about her, saying, "She's buried under the patio," laughing as if it were a hilarious neighborhood rumor. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the concrete would keep their secrets forever. But in 1992, the police started looking into an old missing persons report, and they realized the West stories about Heather didn't add up. The police decided to get a search warrant, not for murder, but just to look for a body they weren't even sure existed. When they finally broke ground in the garden, they found a hand bone wearing a distinctive silver ring. It was Heather, and she wasn't alone. As the police pulled Heather West's remains from the garden, the atmosphere at the police station changed instantly. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was a mass murder investigation. Fred West was brought into the interrogation room. Initially, he tried to be the nice guy. He joked with the detectives, offered them cigarettes, and played the role of a grieving father who had accidentally killed his daughter during an argument. He figured if he confessed to one death, they might stop digging. He was wrong. The map of bones. The police didn't stop. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, technology usually used for finding underground pipes or ruins. When they scanned the cellar and the kitchen floor of 25 Cromwell Street, the screen lit up with anomalies. There were hollow spaces and shapes under the concrete that shouldn't have been there. Sensing the walls closing in, Fred did something chilling. He asked for a piece of paper and a pen. With a steady hand, he drew a map of his own house and garden. He marked little X's in different spots. "There's one there," he said, pointing to the bathroom floor, "and a couple more under the patio." He began naming names. Shirley Robinson, a pregnant girl who had lived with them. Juanita Mott, a friend of their daughter. Each time he spoke, the police realized the scale of the horror was bigger than anyone in the UK had ever seen. The kitchen floor. The most gruesome discovery happened under the very place the family ate their meals. Forensic teams had to literally take the house apart. They ripped up the floorboards in the kitchen and began digging into the dirt beneath. They found the remains of young women wrapped in plastic or hidden in makeshift coffins made of brick and mortar. Some of the bodies were missing hands and feet. Fred had removed them so he could fit the victims into smaller spaces under the floor. While Fred was talking, Rosemary West was playing a different game. She sat in her cell, cold and silent. She claimed she knew absolutely nothing. She acted like a victim herself, saying Fred was a monster who did everything while she was out shopping or looking after the kids. But the police weren't buying it. They found jewelry belonging to the missing girls in Rose's bedroom. They found clothes that didn't belong to her. Most importantly, they realized that Fred was often away at work when some of these girls disappeared. The evidence was pointing to a terrifying truth. Rose wasn't just a bystander. She was the one who lured them in, and in many cases, she was the one holding the knife. As the body count rose to 12, the town of Gloucester was in shock. But the police had one more place to look, a field miles away from the house where Fred used to work as a farmhand years ago. By now, 25 Cromwell Street was a skeleton of a house. Forensics had ripped out the stairs, the floors, and the garden soil. But Fred West wasn't done talking. He started reminiscing about his early days, the time before he met Rose, when he lived in a caravan and worked as a farmhand. The police realized that the horror didn't start at Cromwell Street. It started much earlier. The letterbox field. Fred led investigators to a quiet, windswept area outside of Gloucester known as Fingerpost Field and Letterbox Field. He walked through the grass with a strange calmness, almost like he was showing off his old workspace. He pointed to a spot in the dirt and told them to dig. There they found the remains of Anne McFall. She was an 18-year-old girl who had been pregnant with Fred's child back in 1967. She had disappeared decades ago, and her family had never known why. Fred had kept her secret buried in that field for nearly 30 years. The first wife and daughter. But the most heartbreaking discovery was yet to come. The police began looking into the whereabouts of Fred's first wife, Catherine Rena Costello, and their stepdaughter, Charmaine. Fred claimed Rena had simply left him and moved back to Scotland, but the detectives found a witness who remembered Fred doing renovations at his old apartment in Midland Road years prior. They went to the old building, ripped up the floorboards, and found 8-year-old Charmaine West. Imagine the horror. Fred had killed his own little girl while her mother was away, buried her under the kitchen floor, and then continued to live in that apartment as if nothing had happened. Later, he tracked down Rena, killed her too, and buried her in a completely different field. The Rose defense starts to crack. Back at the station, the police were putting immense pressure on Rose West. They showed her the photos of the bodies. They showed her the jewelry, the rings and necklaces belonging to the dead girls that they found in her dresser. Rose stayed stone-faced. "I'm a mother," she would say. "I could never hurt a fly. Fred did this. He's a madman. I was just a housewife." But then, the surviving children started to speak. They told stories of the cellar. They described how Rose was often more violent than Fred. They talked about how she would beat them and how she was the one who controlled the lodgers when Fred was away at work. The police realized that Fred was the builder who disposed of the bodies, but Rose was often the predator who chose the victims and took part in the torture. They weren't a man and his accomplice. They were a partnership of equals. As the body count hit 12, the UK was paralyzed with fear. Every missing persons file from the last 20 years was being reopened. People wondered, how many more are there? But just as the trial was about to begin, Fred West decided he didn't want to face the music. The world was waiting for the trial of the century. Everyone wanted to see Fred and Rose West stand side by side in a courtroom and explain how they could turn a family home into a graveyard. But Fred had one last trick up his sleeve. On New Year's Day, 1995, while awaiting trial in Winston Green Prison, Fred West didn't want to face the families of his victims. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Using a makeshift rope made from his own clothes, Fred hanged himself in his cell. He died taking many secrets to his grave. Police believe there could be up to 20 or 30 more victims scattered across the UK that Fred never admitted to. With Fred dead, the focus shifted entirely to the woman who claimed she was just an innocent housewife, Rosemary West. The trial of Rose West. In October 1995, Rose stood alone in the dock. She looked like a typical grandmother, short hair, glasses, and a quiet voice. Her defense was simple. Fred did everything. I was a victim of his violence too. But the prosecution had a mountain of evidence. They brought in the surviving West children, who gave heartbreaking testimony. They described the House of Horrors as a place of constant fear, where Rose was the one who enforced the rules with a belt or her fists. They found the victims' belongings in her room. Most importantly, they proved that some of the girls disappeared while Fred was away at work, meaning Rose was the only one home. The jury didn't believe her innocent wife act for a second. After several weeks of gruesome details, Rose West was found guilty of 10 murders. The judge sentenced her to life in prison, telling her she was a debased woman who had helped her husband hunt and kill young girls for sport. The city of Gloucester didn't want a shrine to serial killers. People were traveling from all over the country just to take pictures of the house. It was a dark cloud over the neighborhood. In 1996, the city made a drastic decision. They didn't just sell the house, they destroyed it. Professional crews wore white suits and masks as they tore down every brick of 25 Cromwell Street. They didn't even leave the foundation. They crushed the bricks into tiny pieces so that trophy hunters couldn't steal them. Today, if you walk down that street, you won't see a house. In its place is a quiet, paved public walkway lined with trees. There are no signs, no plaques, and no mention of the Wests. The city wanted to bury the memory of the House of Horrors forever. Rose West remains in prison to this day, one of the few women in British history to be told she will never be released. She still maintains her innocence, but the ghosts of the girls under the floorboards tell a different story.